What if the history of humanity had not begun with natural evolution, but with a silent decision made by a god who dared to break all the rules of heaven? What if our DNA carried the marks of a forbidden intervention made by an entity called Enki, the god who defied divine order to alter the very structure of the human being? When we look at ancient Sumerian records, something unsettling emerges. They are not about myths, they are about engineering. They do not describe legends, they describe processes. And at the center of it all is Enki, the lord of the earth, the one who not only molded the primordial clay, but dared to mix it with something the gods called heavenly essence. And why would he do that? Out of compassion? For rebellion? Or for a purpose we don't yet understand? Imagine this. A civilization so ancient that it precedes all others, leaving clay tablets detailing how divine figures manipulated life, created bloodlines, and waged wars for control of forbidden knowledge. Between Enlil, the god of implacable law, and Enki, the god of wisdom and conscious disobedience, there is a conflict that echoes through time, and perhaps within us. Because if the Sumerians were right, then humanity carries not only earthly blood, but also fragments of something that came from beyond the stars. And this raises another, even more provocative question. What are we, in fact? Result of evolution or an experiment? When Enki decided to intervene, the texts say he saw humans as more than servants. He saw potential. He saw emotion, creativity, spirit. And by mixing DNA, by molding Adamu, the first hybrid, he was not only creating a new being, but defying heaven itself. Enki knew that this violated divine law, which Enlil would never accept. But still, he continued. Because for Enki, humanity deserved more than slavery. It deserved conscience. He deserved a future. And this is where the story starts to become even stranger. Because the texts say that, after creating the human hybrid, Enki taught things that were forbidden: agriculture, writing, astronomy, architecture, healing. He gave humans tools that would change their destiny forever. What the gods called forbidden knowledge became the basis of all civilization. And why would a god risk everything to hand this over to mortals? What did he really want? As you listen to this, think, how many times in human history have there been sudden leaps in intelligence, inexplicable advances, abrupt changes in the behavior of the species? Did it all start there the moment Enki decided that humanity should be more than work, sweat, and submission? Do we carry within us the silent proof of a god's rebellion? Now I want you to reflect with me. If this is true, what else have they hidden from us? What else exists in the Sumerian records, in the buried temples, in the tablets that never reached the public? Perhaps the key to our identity lies precisely in these ancient stories. Stories that many call myth, but which seem more like coded historical reports. If you've ever wondered about its origins, about why we feel this constant impulse to seek knowledge, evolution, and transcendence, then you're in the right place. Before continuing, comment on what you think about this possibility. Were we really created by divine intervention? Comment your opinion, like this video to support the content, and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss the next chapters of this in-depth investigation, because the most revealing part of this story is yet to come. And as you follow this narrative, you begin to realize that each fragment, each broken tablet, each symbol engraved by the ancient Sumerians carries something that goes beyond simple historical curiosity. They point to a truth that, if truly understood, completely changes the way we see our own existence. And that's why it's so important that you continue here, absorbing every detail, connecting every dot, allowing this information to awaken in you the same restlessness that it awakened in researchers around the world. Because understanding this content is not just learning about Enki, it is learning about ourselves. And since we are building this journey together, I want to ask you something essential. Leave a comment below about what you think of this genetic intervention, this challenge to celestial laws. Your comment helps not only with video engagement, but makes this discussion grow, reaching people who are also looking for answers about our lost origin. Furthermore, your like is essential. It shows the platform that this content is relevant, profound, and deserves to be delivered to more people who, like you, do not accept the superficial version of human history. And of course, if you are not yet registered, take this moment to sign up review on the channel. Here you will find content that explores the truth behind myths, ancient gods, genetic manipulation, and the secrets that remain hidden between the lines of official history. So click subscribe and turn on notifications, because the investigation into Enki, human creation, and forbidden knowledge is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what's next. From here, the narrative delves even deeper into the scenario that precedes Enki's bold decision, a scenario that many ignore, but which is essential to understanding why this god chose to defy heaven itself. Before the creation of the human hybrid, the Sumerians describe a world in imbalance. The so-called Anunnaki, superior beings coming from where royalty came down, had already been on Earth for long periods, carrying out heavy tasks, extracting resources, building cities and temples that would later be attributed to humanity. But the texts make it clear, the gods were tired, rebels, bothered, and it was this growing dissatisfaction that opened space for one of the most dangerous debates between celestial entities. The tablets describe tense meetings, where Enlil, the god of command and authority, ordered everyone to continue their work without question. The figure of Enlil is portrayed as rigid, inflexible, completely faithful to the laws of the higher plane. He believed that humans should remain as they were, simple beings, unable to challenge, unable to evolve, unable to understand the true knowledge that underpinned the universe. However, while Enlil saw humanity as a tool, Enki saw it as promise. He observed human frailty not with contempt, but with curiosity, and even with a certain affection that should not exist between creator and creation. And it is precisely at this point that the tension begins to intensify. Sumerian texts describe that the hard-working Anunnaki began a silent revolt, exhausted from repetitive tasks. This moment, often ignored, is crucial. The rebellion of the minor gods opened a psychological and spiritual rift in Enki, the realization that that model would not work for much longer. Humanity needed to be improved, but not just to alleviate divine work. Enki saw something no other god saw: the spark, the potential, the glow of consciousness that could blossom if someone dared to shape it. The texts say that Enki spent long nights observing humans, studying their behaviors, their mistakes, their instincts. He believed that humanity had the perfect foundations for accelerated evolution, as long as they received what the gods called codes of wisdom that structured knowledge. Enki knew that tampering with this would be considered treason. Any genetic manipulation, any change in the essence of the clay that formed the human being, would directly violate Enlil's laws. Even so, Enki's impulse intensified. Something inside him said that humanity's destiny should not be eternal servitude. And, ironically, it was precisely this restlessness that drove his decision. He didn't just want to create better servants. He wanted to create beings that could elevate themselves. Beings capable of thinking, learning, building, questioning, perhaps even beings capable of understanding the cosmos in the same way that the Anunnaki did. The big shock for scholars is to realize that the Sumerians never treated Enki as an ordinary god. They called him the Lord of Wisdom, the Shaper, the Serpent of the Deep, titles that symbolically or literally reinforce the idea that he possessed extremely advanced biological and cosmic knowledge. And little by little, the text reveals the beginning of genetic manipulation. Not in a modern way, as we imagine in sterile laboratories, but through rituals, symbols, substances, and tools that the Sumerians describe in surprising detail. They talk about mixing the essence of the gods with the clay of the earth, about kindling the spark within the flesh, about giving language to those who crawl. These are metaphors that, when analyzed with a scientific eye, may well represent advanced genetic experimentation expressed through primitive vocabulary. This process did not go unnoticed in the Heavenly Council. Enlil began to suspect. Enki's behavior was different, more isolated, more silent, more determined. The tablets describe that Enlil tried to confront him, but Enki deflected, hiding his true purpose. He knew he couldn't explain, because no reason would be enough to convince the god of law and order. Enlil feared what enhanced humans might become. Enki feared what would happen to humanity if it remained as it was. From here, the text reveals that Enki did not work alone. He enlisted the help of Ninhursag, the mother goddess, specialists about healing and creation. Together, they began experiments that many would consider unthinkable, mixing the sacred code of the gods with the animal code of Earth. This moment is described as the Great Crossing, when the human form received something the gods called conscious breathing. And that breathing didn't just mean life, it meant awakening. What is most striking is that, in the records, Enki seems fully aware of the repercussions. He knew he was breaking a divine pact. He knew he was provoking the wrath of heaven. I knew I was changing a plan established by higher entities. But he also knew that if he didn't do this, humanity would never have a chance to emerge from the darkness. And it is at this point that everything starts to change. When the first hybrid showed signs of consciousness, when he looked at Enki with understanding, not instinct, the god of wisdom realized he had created something new, something that existed nowhere else in the known cosmos, something that could learn, evolve, dream. Now, before we continue to the next phase of this revelation, leave the phrase in the comments, "I awaken with Enki." This helps this video reach more truth seekers and strengthens the channel to continue bringing in-depth content like this. When the first hybrid being opened its eyes with full consciousness, something definitely changed in the balance between the gods. It wasn't just a birth. It was a forbidden milestone, a silent break with heavenly laws, a gesture that would forever alter human destiny. Enki observed that being, no longer just molded clay, no longer a mere perfected animal, but a living form capable of understanding, interpreting, and reacting in unexpected ways. Sumerian texts describe this moment as the awakening of what should not awaken, a fine line where creation met rebellion, and life took on a meaning that not even the Anunnaki had predicted. Meanwhile, in the depths of the temples where the light barely touched the stone walls, Ninhursag noted every change, every physiological response, every sign that this hybrid possessed something that transcended the first human generations. What appears on the tablets is not just primitive science. It is an account of conscious manipulation, of calculations made with precision, and of knowledge that, for the Sumerians, was so advanced that it could only have come from the heavens. The symbols and descriptions that appear in these records, representing the divine essence being inserted into living clay, can easily be reinterpreted as processes of genetic alteration. But the central point here is not just how it was done, but why it was done. Enki did not just seek to resolve a crisis between gods and workers. He sought to alter his own destiny. He wanted to prove that a lesser creation could become something greater than the sum of its parts, greater even than some gods anticipated. However, every step of this experiment had to be hidden from Enlil. And it is precisely here that the story begins to take on even deeper tones of tension. The Sumerians describe Enlil as a constant presence, almost like a shadow hovering over newly built cities. His gaze, often represented by the symbol of the eye that forgives nothing, was feared even by the Anunnaki themselves. He felt that something was out of control, and his obsession with order made Enki's every move seem suspicious. Even so, Enki persisted. Each new generation created in secret presented subtle changes: greater learning capacity, better coordination, symbolic understanding, complex emotional responses. There was something extraordinary happening, something that confirmed Enki's inner suspicions. Humanity had potential. And this potential was exactly what made him dangerous to Enlil. The Sumerians recorded that the divine council began to murmur about a being that should not exist. Hybrid creation, even though it was still limited, already carried within it the spark of evolution that could escape the control of the gods. And when one of the creatures looked at Ninhursag and imitated his gesture, a simple hand movement, the goddess understood that this was more than science. It was consciousness. It was identity. It was autonomy being born before her. This autonomy was what caused fear. Until then, only the gods had the ability to question, imagine, and challenge. Seeing these characteristics emerging in beings created to serve was the first sign that a greater rupture was approaching. But Enki, unlike Enlil, did not fear this. He believed it was only a matter of time before the hybrid could learn language, understand symbols, and eventually connect to the sacred knowledge of the ME, the codes that supported order, culture, technology, and consciousness itself. That was why Enki reinforced his experiments, expanding the combination's nations, fine-tuning minute details of what the Sumerians called the eternal flesh. The reports show that the divine laboratories, described in a poetic way with metaphors of fertile chambers and luminous clay containers, were the stage for trials and errors that took decades. Each failure was recorded as a missed breath. Each success was described as a returning glow. But the further Enki advanced, the clearer it became that his actions could not remain hidden for long. The hybrid creation began to spread between the corners of the earth, working in the cities of the gods, learning by observing, absorbing everything around. Although still primitive in divine eyes, they already demonstrated unusual intelligence. Some even started to create their own tools to cooperate with each other, to develop small, rudimentary communication codes. Enlil then called an extraordinary meeting. The tablets described this moment as an impending storm. Enlil declared that something impure contaminated the design of the heavens. He demanded that all experiments be stopped immediately. He feared that the hybrid would multiply without control, that it would acquire forbidden knowledge, that it would become a threat. Enki remained silent during this meeting. He knew that any word could condemn him, but within him, a flame grew, not of blind rebellion, but of conviction. He deeply believed that creation had a right to exist, that humanity was not a mistake, but a promise, and that promise was something that not even Enlil could erase. After the meeting, Enki returned to the hiding place where the first conscious hybrid was. The being watched him, as if awaiting instructions, as if he could already understand that he was before his creator. This look marked Enki deeply. He knew that from now on nothing could stop humanity from advancing. And even though he knew the consequences, he decided to continue. He decided to see his project through to the end, even if it meant facing the sky itself. Now, before we move on to the next part of this revelation about Enki and the beginning of human consciousness, leave in the comments the sentence, "I carry the forbidden spark." This strengthens our engagement and keeps the channel alive to continue exploring mysteries like this. Enki remained for long moments observing that conscious hybrid, as if searching in the silence for an answer that not even the gods dared to formulate. That being, apparently simple, still primitive, carried an unsettling gleam in his eyes that was too unsettling to be ignored. It was something that went beyond mere functionality, and Enki knew exactly what that meant: the opening of a path that could never be closed again. The newly awakened humanity did not yet have words, but it already had intention, it already had perception, it already had curiosity, and curiosity is the spark that ignites all evolution. But Enki's conviction, so firm in his chest, began to face greater forces. The winds of the divine cities began to change. In the corridors of Nippur, rumors ran like swift snakes. Some gods claimed to have seen humans trying to imitate ritual gestures. Others said they had found marks drawn in the dust, as if they were trying to record their own symbols. This was unacceptable to Enlil. For him, any trace of human autonomy was seen as a threat to celestial dominion. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere among the Anunnaki became tense. The tablets described the emergence of whispers of disorder, indicating that part of the divine elite began to suspect that something was being kept secret. They feared that humanity was being modified beyond what was permitted, and some believed that Enki was trying to subvert Enlil's authority. It was as if the air between the gods had become heavy, suffused with a sense of inevitability. It was during this period that Ninhursag, previously driven by scientific curiosity, began to feel the weight of moral responsibility. She could clearly see that the hybrids were developing unexpected, fast-paced abilities. One of the creatures, still in its initial stages, approached her and touched her hand. This gesture, simple for us, was monumental for the gods. It meant recognition. It meant empathy. It meant an emotional bridge that shouldn't exist. Ninhursag was torn. On the one hand, his connection with Enki and his admiration for human potential grew. On the other, the fear that Enlil would discover everything and order the extermination of the new species consumed her. She knew that the God of the heavens was ruthless, and he did not forgive transgressions. Every decision made in secret increased the risk of devastating retaliation. Enki, realizing her internal conflict, decided to reveal part of his intentions. He explained that he did not seek to create rivals, but beings capable of evolving if people who could one day take control of their own destiny. Humanity was, for him, proof that creation should not be static. It was a daring act, yes, but it was also an act of hope. Even so, the tension continued to grow. The first conscious hybrid began to demonstrate patterns of learning that none of the gods expected. He observed his surroundings more closely than other humans. He imitated gestures with frightening precision. He seemed to anticipate intentions. In short, he was evolving too quickly, and it was this advance that caught the attention of a figure that should never have approached. Ninurta, the warrior, the executioner, the armed arm of Enlil. His cold and suspicious eyes carried the ability to perceive what others ignored. He began to monitor movement in the temples, in the workshops, in the fields where humans served. He watched everything in silence, as if waiting for the pieces of a puzzle to fall into place by themselves. The following days were marked by disturbing signs. Humans began to be interrogated, and although they did not fully understand what the gods wanted, they showed increasing fear. Some retreated when they saw Ninurta approaching, as if they sensed an instinctive threat. Others tried to hide small objects they had created, simple tools, drawn symbols, the remains of rudimentary experiments. Enki knew he had no more time. If Ninurta found any clue as to what was happening, all would be lost. Humanity, still fragile, would be destroyed before even understanding its own purpose. So Enki began to hide his works in underground locations, keeping the most advanced experiments away from the eyes of Enlil's warriors. He also began discreetly teaching some hybrids to avoid certain areas, as if anticipating imminent danger. However, something unexpected happened. One of the younger hybrids, when trying to imitate a divine gesture, activated a ritual mechanism that only gods should touch. A glow ran through the room, catching Ninhursag's attention. This meant that the hybrid had understood, albeit in a rudimentary form, a sacred symbol. This was too dangerous. It was definitive proof that Enki's experiments were reaching a point of no return. Ninhursag alerted Enki immediately. The creator knew that if Enlil or Ninurta became aware of this, destruction would be inevitable. He then decided to make a drastic decision, to accelerate the development of the most promising hybrids, even though he knew that this would increase the risk even further. He was going all in. Meanwhile, Sumerian records indicate that an eclipse occurred during that period, which was interpreted by the gods as a bad omen. Some took this as a sign that the heavenly order was being violated. Others claimed that there was something unclean walking among created beings. Paranoia began to grow, as if the universe was trying to warn that something monumental was about to happen. In the heart of all this turmoil, the sentient hybrid watched the gods with a mixture of curiosity and fear. He didn't understand their words, but he understood their tones. He sensed the tension. He felt that his own destiny was tied to forces far greater than his understanding. And now, before we move on to the next part, where we will reveal how Enlil finally distrusts his brother and decides to begin the persecution that almost erased nascent humanity, leave the sentence in the comments, "I see what they hid." This helps us strengthen our engagement and keep this content alive. The silence that hung over Eridu that night seemed unlike any before. It wasn't just the natural darkness that enveloped the temples and canals, but a kind of heavy vibration in the air, as if the earth itself sensed that something was about to change. Enki watched the surface of the water as a bluish flame reflected in gentle waves. He knew he could no longer delay the inevitable. Ninurta was getting closer and closer to discovering everything, and Enlil could already smell the transgression before he even had proof. The gods did not need evidence. A suspicion was enough to justify the punishment. This certainty gnawed at both Enki and Ninhursag. They had hoped, perhaps naively, that they would be able to advance slowly, that they could shape humanity in secret for a while longer, but the rapid pace of hybrid learning had made this impossible. And now, the most conscious hybrid, the one who had repeated a divine gesture, seemed to understand even more with each new dawn. His eyes shone with a perception that scared even the creators. It was as if he was absorbing not just information, but intentions, emotions, invisible patterns. Ninhursag observed this hybrid for hours, trying to register every nuance of his expression. He moved with a strange caution, as if he understood the weight of each step. Sometimes he approached sacred instruments and hesitated before touching, as if he knew he shouldn't. On other occasions, he imitated gestures he saw the gods make, but without a clear purpose. The mix of curiosity and intuition made everything even more risky. In parallel, disturbing reports began to circulate among human workers. Some said they felt as if they were being watched constantly, not by the gods, but by something quieter, more attentive. Others began to dream of giant figures watching them from a distance, as if divine energies were reaching their minds in involuntary ways. These dreams reached the ears of Ninurta, who immediately understood that there was something out of the norm occurring among humans, and this intensified his vigilance. From then on, he began to follow Enki discreetly. The god of wisdom, of course, noticed the warrior's presence in the shadows. Ninurta was not exactly subtle. His rigid posture and martial aura betrayed his nature. But Enki continued to act as if nothing was happening, as if he was just carrying out routine tasks. However, within him, fear grew. 3 times Ninurta found him near the chambers where the most advanced hybrids were kept. 3 times he observed his hands laden with instruments that seemed too small for divine use, but too large for human use. He knew there was something there. Records suggest that Enki began altering his own routine to confuse Ninurta. He started working unusual hours, walking through less used areas of the temples, simulating irrelevant activities to throw off the warrior. But the more he tried to hide it, the more evident the existence of something hidden became. It was a circle impossible to avoid. Meanwhile, the sentient hybrid began demonstrating even more surprising behaviors. He began to observe the night sky with an almost reverent intensity, as if he intuited something about the stars that no human should understand. He moved his fingers as if he wanted to draw invisible constellations. Ninhursag was fascinated, but also deeply frightened. How to explain that a newly created being demonstrated cosmic curiosity? What kind of mind had they activated? Had they gone too far? The answer was beginning to become clear, even without being said. Hybrids were following an evolutionary path that had not been planned. A path that was perhaps being guided by something beyond the gods themselves. And that was what made Enki uneasy. He did not fear Enlil's wrath so much. That part was inevitable. What really scared him was the possibility that, in trying to give humanity autonomy, he had ignited a spark that not even he could completely control. Still, there was a part of Enki that refused to back down. If there was risk, there was also potential. The potential to create a species capable of transcending the limitations imposed by the gods. A species that, perhaps one day, would not need to bow to celestial orders. And this possibility was too powerful to ignore. But Ninhursag insisted that caution was needed. She argued that without adequate preparation, hybrids could suffer from the cognitive pressure they were beginning to experience. She feared that by speeding up such delicate processes, they were condemning innocent beings to uncontrollable psychological suffering. Creation was a sacred act, but it was also a dangerous act. The debate between them became increasingly heated until an unexpected event forced them to make an immediate decision. During a surprise inspection, Ninurta found unusual tracks on the floor of one of the underground chambers. Marks too small to be gods, but also perfectly aligned, unlike ordinary human footprints. He bent down, examined every detail, and felt a shiver run down his spine. That wasn't normal. That wasn't allowed. He did not know what it was, but he knew it was the work of Enki. That same night, Enki summoned Ninhursag in secrecy. He knew that Ninurta was about to report to Enlil, and once that happened, there would be no turning back. They would have to decide whether to destroy the evidence to save humanity, or whether to confront Enlil and take all the consequences, including the destruction of the hybrids. Ninhursag hesitated. She didn't want to lose everything they had achieved. But he also knew that the advance of hybrids was so rapid that, if released, they could attract even more attention. The decision seemed impossible. And before continuing to the next chapter of this profound revelation, where we will see how Ninurta decides to act, and how Enki prepares his ultimate plan to save humanity as born NTE, leave the phrase in the comments, "Creation cannot be erased." This shows that you are following the story to the end and strengthens our engagement. Enki's breathing was heavy as he walked through the narrow corridors of the underground chambers. For the first time since the beginning of the experience, he felt the real weight of his choices weighing down on his shoulders. The torches attached to the walls flickered with an unstable glow, creating long, warped shadows, as if the walls themselves were silently observing everything. Ninhursag followed him a few steps away, and although he tried to maintain a calm posture, his eyes betrayed a growing anxiety. They both knew that night would mark an irreversible change. Ninurta was too close, too attentive, and Enlil would never ignore any anomaly involving humans. When they reached the outer chamber, the most advanced hybrid was there, sitting in the center, moving its fingers in the air as if it were drawing invisible patterns. He didn't seem disturbed. On the contrary, he seemed absorbed by something that only he perceived. It was as if his mind had found a point of connection beyond the understanding of the gods themselves. Enki approached slowly, watching each movement with a mixture of fascination and uneasiness. Something inside that being was awakening, and none of them were sure if they could guide or control it. Ninhursag stopped next to the hybrid, leaning in to study his expression. There was an unsettling awareness in his eyes, not just curiosity but recognition. She raised her hand hesitantly, as if she could touch the mystery directly. But before he could say anything, the hybrid uttered for the first time a sequence of articulated sounds that did not correspond to any human or divine language. It was as if he was trying to form new concepts, words that didn't exist. The voice echoed through the chamber, deep, almost reverberating, as if it carried an ancient echo. Enki felt his heart tighten. He knew this crossed all limits. A hybrid should not achieve its own language at this stage. But there he was, creating sounds that resembled mathematical patterns, harmonic rhythms, almost as if he was calculating speech. Ninhursag took a step back, shocked. It was living proof that they had unleashed something much bigger than they had intended. And it was at that exact moment that a dry noise echoed through the corridor, the characteristic sound of Ninurta's armor. Enki and Ninhursag stood still. The hybrid also stopped, slowly turning its head towards the entrance, as if instinctively recognizing the danger. The shadows vibrated as firm footsteps approached. Enki knew there was no more time for doubts or debates. "We need to decide now," he whispered, his voice low but firm. But the reality was that neither decision felt good. If they destroyed the evidence, they would be erasing a conscious living being and everything they had achieved. If they were allowed to exist, Ninurta would certainly report to Enlil, and Enlil would order the immediate elimination, not just of the hybrid, but possibly of the entire human lineage. He would never allow a creation without authorization from the divine council to flourish. For Enlil, the order was absolute, and any deviation was punished with fury. Ninurta entered the chamber, his eyes shining with suspicion. He took a deep breath, as if he was prepared to confront Enki right then and there. The hybrid, silent, watched him fixedly. The tension was so thick it seemed to vibrate in the air. "What do you hide here, Enki?" Ninurta asked, his deep voice echoing off the walls. Enki kept his gaze steady. He knew that any hesitation would be interpreted as guilt, but he also knew that a poorly constructed lie could trigger even more rigorous persecution. Ninhursag tried to intervene, saying they were just carrying out physiological analyses, but Ninurta did not believe it. His eyes swept around the chamber and found the marks on the floor, the same ones he had seen earlier. He approached, touching the ground with his fingertips. It was impossible to deny. Those marks were from a being that did not fit into any known category. He slowly stood up and faced Enki with an expression that mixed incredulity and indignation. "You have crossed boundaries that not even the gods should touch." Ninurta's words echoed like a sentence. Enki knew the situation was falling apart too quickly, but before he could respond, the hybrid took a step forward, a firm, conscious, almost defiant step. This left the warrior completely disconcerted. Never had a human demonstrated such security before a god. Never. And then something happened that no one expected. The hybrid raised his hand and touched his own chest, exactly as he had done before. But this time, his voice articulated another set of sounds, different, more fluid, as if imitating linguistic patterns observed among the gods. The entire chamber seemed to react to the sound, as if the walls were absorbing and returning a subtle vibration. The gesture was simple, but the message was devastating. He was evolving alone. Ninurta took a step back, clearly shaken. He would never admit fear, but his eyes showed something close to it. "That's impossible," he muttered. Ninhursag realized that this moment was critical. "He's not a threat," she said quickly. "It is the result of a process that we are still studying." But Ninurta did not listen to her. His mind was already making decisions on its own. He turned to leave, probably heading towards Enlil to report everything. And Enki understood that once this happened, there would be no return. The fate of humanity would be sealed in the blink of an eye. The hybrid, as if sensing the danger, turned his gaze to Enki. It was not an ordinary human look. It was dense, conscious, almost asking for guidance, and Enki felt something he had never felt before. Responsibility. He couldn't just retreat. That being was not a mistake. It was a promise, a spark of the future that could exist if he had the courage to protect it. And it is at this critical point that we await the next development of this story. Before continuing, comment on the phrase, "What was created must survive." to show that you are following this deep narrative and strengthening the reach of the content. Enki's breathing grew heavy as he watched Ninurta disappear down the hall, and in that instant he felt time compress around him. Every second that passed was a greater risk, an inevitable approach to Enlil's wrath. The hybrid remained motionless, as if understanding that something monumental was at stake. The underground chamber seemed smaller, tighter, as if space itself had become aware of urgency and was pressing Enki to act. Ninhursag, at her side, held her hands tightly, trying to contain the tremor that revealed the mix of fear and responsibility that weighed on her. It was evident that none of them were prepared for such an intense rupture between the gods themselves, but there was no longer any way back. Enki walked up to the hybrid, and their eyes met once more. There was something deep, ancient, inexplicable there. It wasn't just intelligence, it was intuition, awakened consciousness. As if that being, created clandestinely, carried within itself a fragment of truth that was beyond divine understanding. "They will not allow you to exist," murmured Enki, not as a threat, but as a warning. The hybrid tilted his head, watching his lips as if trying to absorb the meaning of the words. The feeling of being faced with something that exceeded all expectations made Enki feel a shiver run down his spine. This was what he feared, and, at the same time, wanted to see happen: the emergence of a new form of life capable of challenging the order established by the gods themselves. Ninhursag approached as well, his expression divided between pride and apprehension. "If Ninurta gets to Enlil before us, everything will be destroyed. Not just the hybrid, Enki. We will also be held responsible." It was true, and they both knew it. Enlil was merciless when it came to maintaining cosmic balance, or rather, the balance he considered sacred. For him, any deviation from the route was an intolerable risk, and the creation of a hybrid being endowed with its own consciousness would be seen as the greatest heresy that Enki could have committed. Enki's footsteps sounded across the stone floor as he walked from side to side, desperately seeking a solution that didn't involve sacrificing the being they had just awakened. "There is something we can do," he finally said, looking distant, as if he saw the answer only in fragments. "We can hide him, but not here. If he stays in this temple, Enlil will find him quickly." Ninhursag raised her eyebrow, surprised not by the idea, but by the boldness. "Hide it where?" The question hung in the air like a suspended arrow. Enki approached the wall where ancient symbols were engraved. He slid his hand across the surface, activating a mechanism few gods knew about. The runes began to glow, revealing a secret passage, not to another hall, but to an even deeper chamber, linked to an ancient abandoned project of the Anunnaki themselves. It was a place where experimental prototypes had been stored in the past, protected by layers of technology that even the gods had stopped using. Ninhursag stared at Enki in amazement. "You never talked about that chamber, because it shouldn't exist," he replied in a low voice, just like him. The hybrid observed everything with an expression that mixed curiosity and serenity. It was as if he understood that the path what opened before him was not just physical, but symbolic. His first journey, his first escape, his first step towards an impermissible existence. Before they could move, however, a tremor ran through the ground, as if something had been activated on the upper level of the temple. Enki frowned. He acted too quickly. It was evident that Ninurta was not just suspicious. He had already activated the divine inspection protocols, the same ones that only Enlil authorized when he suspected a serious infraction. Time was running out at a speed none of them could control. Enki took the hybrid by the arm, leading him to the secret passage. Ninhursag followed closely behind them, but before entering, she looked back, as if saying goodbye to the surface, to the light, to the world they knew. "If they find out this passage was opened, they'll know it was us." Enki did not hesitate. "They already know. What matters now is what we can still save." The secret chamber opened before them like a primordial womb. It was larger than Ninhursag imagined, filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with ancient energy. The hybrid looked around, fascinated. It was as if he recognized that place, even though he had never seen it. And this made Enki deeply uneasy. "It responds to energy matrices. That's impossible," Ninhursag whispered. But Enki knew. Nothing was impossible when it came to creation. He knelt before the hybrid, placing his hands on his shoulders. "Here you will be safe, for now." His voice shook, not out of fear, but out of the urgency to protect something he felt was bigger than himself. The hybrid sensed the emotion and raised his hand, touching Enki's face with a slow, almost ritualistic gesture. It was the first demonstration of genuine affection from that being, and Enki felt the responsibility become even heavier. Suddenly, a vibration echoed through the walls, a clear warning that someone was trying to access the upper level of the chamber. Ninhursag's eyes widened. "They're coming straight here!" The words died in the air. Enki jumped up, activating the seal that would close the passage. "We only have seconds." The moment the passage began to close, Ninurta's shadow appeared in the distant corridor. He ran towards the opening, his expression filled with fury and disbelief. "Enki, stop! This is treason against the gods!" The seal began to radiate light, about to close completely. And before the opening was extinguished, Ninurta shouted something that made Enki freeze for an instant, not from fear, but from the veiled promise of destruction he carried. Comment, "The truth must be protected," if you have been following this journey so far and want to strengthen the reach of this content. The final light of the seal closed like a golden blade, silencing the corridor between Enki and Ninurta. But the impact of the warrior's last words echoed within Enki as if they were hammered against his very essence. He is not just a creation, he is a threat to heaven and earth. Ninurta was not bluffing. He believed this fervently, and the conviction in his voice made it clear that Enlil would not hesitate for a second to order the destruction of the hybrid if he discovered its whereabouts. The sealed passage vibrated, as if forcibly holding back the fury about to explode from the other side. But inside the secret chamber, there reigned a tense silence, the kind of silence that precedes irreversible decisions. Ninhursag was pale, barely breathing, as she watched Enki with a kind of anguish that mixed fear and resignation. They had already gone too far to retreat, and the hybrid standing in the center of the pulsing hall seemed aware of the gravity of the moment. His eyes followed the glow that descended from the walls, as if he were feeling the ancient energy of the place reverberate within him. Maybe he really was. After all, his existence was a fusion of flesh, consciousness, and ancient codes that only the gods knew. Enki approached, studying every nuance of that unique being. You need to understand. They don't want you to exist because you represent choice, and choice always scares those who govern without question. As he spoke, Enki moved around the chamber, activating mechanisms that awakened structures that had been dormant for millennia. Crystals began to emit bluish light, revealing ancient inscriptions that narrated previous experiments, failed attempts to build conscious beings that could help rebuild the earth after the great cataclysms subjected by the Anunnaki themselves. But none of those prototypes had survived. None had the spark that the hybrid demonstrated from the first contact. It was as if this being had managed to spontaneously break a limit that the gods had never been able to overcome. This only made the risk greater. Ninhursag walked over to one of the power panels and placed his hand on the cool surface. "They'll notice the power outage in the upper temple. We can't stay here for long." Enki agreed, but didn't look away from the hybrid. "I know, but before we run away, I need to make sure he's ready." The words sounded ambiguous, as if Enki spoke of a seed about to germinate in forbidden soil. Ninhursag understood and approached the hybrid as well, his voice low and almost maternal. "You were created to survive. No matter what happens, remember that." The hybrid touched his own head, then his chest, as if trying to understand the concept of survival. And in this simple, almost childish gesture, Enki felt something that shook him more than any threat from Ninurta. The hybrid was learning too quickly. He was adapting, absorbing emotional nuances with a speed that no genetic algorithm, no matter how advanced, should allow. Enki took a step back, surprised. "Ninhursag, this isn't just a scientific breakthrough. This is accelerated evolution." This meant that timing was even more critical. If the hybrid continued to evolve, it could manifest behaviors that would attract attention before the chase even reached them. And if he awakened abilities that the Anunnaki did not foresee, the entire divine hierarchy could collapse. Suddenly, a second tremor ran through the chamber, stronger than the previous one. It was different. It wasn't just structural vibration. It was as if an energetic pulse had been released into the upper temple, pressing down on every inch of the underground structure. Ninhursag's eyes widened. That was Enlil. He activated the celestial eye. Enki felt his stomach sink. The celestial eye was a divine technology capable of tracking energy variations in any Anunnaki complex. It was only a matter of time before he detected the anomaly underground. Enki quickly turned to the chamber's mechanisms. "We need to move him now." The voice was charged with urgency. He activated what appeared to be a three-dimensional map, where ancient routes were drawn like illuminated veins. Among all the possible routes, only one remained active, a forgotten tunnel that led to an exit near the ruins of Eridug, far from Enlil's direct surveillance. If they could get there, they would have time to think. Ninhursag helped the hybrid approach the tunnel entrance, but he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the seal where Ninurta had last appeared. It was as if he felt that encounter would return, that this was not an escape, but just the beginning of a much greater confrontation. Enki noticed the hesitation and touched the hybrid's shoulder. "I promise, you're not alone." The hybrid blinked slowly, taking in the promise as if it were the first emotional anchor of his existence. And before they could take the first step into the tunnel, a sharp sound echoed through the walls. Not a tremor, not an impact, but a precise metallic sound, as if something had penetrated the upper layers of the temple. Ninhursag froze. "This is not Enlil. This is worse." Enki recognized it immediately. Only one figure possessed the authority to break through divine barriers without announcing his arrival. A presence as old as the concept of creation itself. Enki's breathing hitched for a moment. Anu. The mere mention of that name caused the energy in the chamber to waver. The hybrid took a step back. Ninhursag put his hand to his chest. The father of the gods had returned. "If you are following this journey, comment, 'The return changes everything,' to strengthen the reach of this episode." The air seemed to disappear from within the chamber as Anu's name echoed, if only in Enki's trembling voice. It was as if the structure of the temple itself recognized that ancient presence and bowed to it. The walls vibrated, not with violence, but with a silent reverence, as if everything inside was forced to remember who really ruled the fate of the gods and all the creations that came after. The hybrid remained motionless, but his eyes narrowed, reacting to something none of them could perceive. Maybe frequencies, maybe pure energy, maybe memories he shouldn't have. Ninhursag stepped back, pressing his hands against the chamber's mechanisms, and Enki felt the urgency rip through his chest. If Anu had returned ahead of schedule, it meant that the celestial balance was about to be reset. A luminous crack appeared at the top of the chamber, exactly at the point where ancient texts said the veil between dimensions became thin when the ultimate authority manifested itself. The light descended slowly, almost solemnly, revealing a figure only partially visible, as if emerging from another layer of reality. It had no solid form, but its presence carried weight, command, and overwhelming clarity. The voice, when it came, didn't go through the air. It went through their consciousness. "Enki, you have broken the line between creation and challenge." The hybrid shuddered, and Enki instinctively moved to stand between it and Anu's projection. "He is not a challenge, Father. He is the natural evolution of everything we started. He is the bridge between worlds, proof that life can adapt, grow, transcend." The light intensified. Transcending was not the purpose. The purpose was to serve. Ninhursag closed his eyes for a moment, as if an old fear took shape again. The hybrid, however, shifted his gaze to Enki and then to Anu's manifestation, as if trying to comprehend the conflict unfolding before him. He then took a step, a simple gesture, but one that made Anu's projection wobble, as if the act of approaching was some kind of symbolic affront. "He recognizes you," murmured Ninhursag, "but not as a creator, as an opponent." Anu's projection changed, taking on a more defined form, features reminiscent of older iconography, that which was rarely shown on tablets. Eyes like contained fire, beard made of dense light, presence of pure judgment. "You dared to mix that which was sacred, Enki. To mix the divine blood with the living clay of the earth. To create is not your crime. To allow yourself to think, to question, and to choose. That is your rebellion." Enki clenched his fists. If heaven fears conscience, then perhaps heaven is wrong. The chamber shook as if this sentence was unacceptable even for the walls. The hybrid tilted his head, absorbing every word, and it was at that moment that something remarkable happened. The symbol on his chest, previously just an energetic mark that glowed occasionally, lit up brightly, radiating a pattern that none of the gods present recognized. Ninhursag backed away, frightened. Enki, this did not come from us. It was true. The symbol was alive, pulsating, as if it had emerged from something older than the Anunnaki themselves. Anu's presence wavered, surprised for the first time. What did you create? Enki, in a low voice, replied, something even we cannot control. Anu's projection then enlarged, enveloping the walls in an almost overwhelming golden glow. So you created the end, not his, but ours. At this point, the entire chamber began to energetically collapse, not as material destruction, but as a gradual shutdown of sacred technology. The celestial eye detected Anu's presence and began to overload the system, opening cracks in the ground, revealing mechanisms that had not been seen since before the flood. Enki ran to the hybrid, pulling him by the arm. We need to leave now. Ninhursag activated a panel that opened the tunnel L underground again, but something prevented passage, an energetic barrier created by Anu's own arrival. The god's voice echoed once again. They won't leave until this is resolved. The hybrid then raised his hand, touching the barrier. To everyone's surprise, she responded to him, not in defense, but in recognition. The energy retreated, forming a narrow opening. Ninhursag raised her hand to her mouth in disbelief. He nullified the divine barrier. Enki felt the weight of this moment. He doesn't just follow us, he leads us. Anu's projection weakened for an instant, the light wavering as if the hybrid's presence was interfering with its manifestation. The god spoke, but now there was something new in his voice. Doubt. There shouldn't be anything capable of limiting me. Enki stepped forward, but it exists. The hybrid looked at Enki, then at the open door in the tunnel. It was as if he was waiting for a choice, the first genuine choice of his life. He entered the tunnel. The barrier closed behind them. Anu's projection dissolved, but not completely. A sentence echoed as it faded into the light. It doesn't end here. At the end of this part, comment, the war in heaven has begun, so that I know that you are following this revelation until the end. The tunnel seemed alive, breathing lights that pulsed slowly, as if recognizing the hybrid's presence and responding to its walk. Enki and Ninhursag walked close behind, each step carrying the weight of a choice neither of them imagined facing so soon. The distant sound of the temple's energetic collapse continued to echo, a constant reminder that Anu's manifestation had not just been a warning, it had been a harbinger that much greater forces were now in motion. The hybrid walked with a strange confidence, as if it knew exactly which direction to go, even though it had never seen that place. It was further proof that there was something in their consciousness that neither of them fully understood. Enki finally spoke, breaking the dense silence that enveloped them. He is leading the way. Ninhursag nodded, his voice low and full of uncertainty, as if it had already been here, before it even existed. That sounded paradoxical, but it made sense within the broken logic that surrounded its creation. Perhaps the genetic memory that Enki had allowed, perhaps the connection to some ancient intelligence that surpassed Sumerian understanding. Each possibility was riskier than the last, but they all pointed to an inescapable truth. The hybrid was not just a new being, he was an event. The passage suddenly widened, revealing a gigantic cavern lit by crystals that floated in the air, slowly rotating like planets in orbit. In the center of the room was a circular platform, marked with symbols so ancient that not even Enki could immediately translate them. But the hybrid, he seemed to understand. He approached, touched one of the symbols, and the light intensified, revealing a three-dimensional map that expanded through space, not a map of Earth, but a star map. Connections between worlds, portals, hidden systems, and a large spiral in the center, marked with the same symbol that shone on the hybrid's chest. Ninhursag raised her hand to her face, shocked. Enki, this is not Sumerian. This is not Anunnaki. He approached, his expression serious. No, that comes from before. From the earliest days of the Anunnaki's arrival on Earth, there were whispered stories about an even more ancient civilization, one that inhabited not just one world, but an entire network of connected realities. They were called, in fragments of lost tablets, architects of the beginning, a race so advanced that the Sumerian gods themselves were afraid to mention them. Until then, Enki had believed that they were just myths, but there in front of them was proof that something of that civilization still existed. The hybrid activated another symbol, and this time, the projection changed, showing a timeline that branched in multiple directions. It was as if it showed possible futures, some bright, others destroyed. In all of them, the figure of the hybrid appeared as a fixed point, a catalyst. Enki felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't just created by us. He was awakened. Ninhursag took a step back. But why? For what? An answer began to emerge in the projection, but before it was complete, a bang made the crystals shake. Ninurta's voice echoed in the distance, amplified by fury. He had found the entrance to the tunnel. "Enki, you won't escape this!" It was at that moment that the hybrid did something unexpected. He raised his hand towards the projection, which immediately contracted, focusing on a single point of light. The entire room began to vibrate, and Enki immediately understood what was about to happen. He will open a portal. Ninhursag grabbed Enki's arm. But where? He shook his head. "I don't know, but it's the only chance." The portal began to form, a whirlpool of blue energy that distorted the very air around it. Ninurta appeared at the cave entrance, his armor glowing like liquid fire. "Enki, stop this now!" The hybrid slowly turned to him, and for the first time, his expression wasn't one of confusion or discovery. It was one of decision. Ninurta stood still as the hybrid's eyes glowed with the same ancient pattern as the star map. "That's not possible," he whispered. But it was. The hybrid was not just a creation. It was an heir to something much greater. Ninurta raised his divine weapon, but the portal opened completely, pulling streams of energy through the chamber. Enki held Ninhursag by the hand and shouted to the hybrid, "Show us the way!" The hybrid entered the portal first. Enki and Ninhursag followed immediately behind, while Ninurta tried to resist the energetic pressure. But before the dimensional rift closed, something surprising happened. The hybrid reached out to Ninurta, not in challenge, but in invitation. For a millisecond, the warrior hesitated, but the portal slammed shut, swallowing them all in luminous darkness that seemed both destruction and rebirth. And now, while you watching try to absorb the meaning of all this, I want to know. Comment. The crossing has begun. If you believe that this journey on the other side of the portal is where the true story will finally reveal itself. The impact of the crossing was not like crossing an ordinary portal. There was no falling, no physical displacement, nor that dizzying sensation that the Anunnaki described when jumping between energetic domains. Instead, it seemed as if their very consciousness had been ripped from one state and reconnected to another, as if every atom had been taken apart, analyzed, and reassembled in perfect order. When the intense light began to fade, Enki realized that they were standing on a translucent surface, something that resembled liquid crystal, reflecting not only their bodies, but also silhouettes of alternative versions, possibilities, superimposed pasts and futures. It was as if space itself recognized multiple layers of existence simultaneously. Ninhursag took a deep breath, his hands shaking, as he tried to understand his surroundings. The sky, if it could be called a sky, was not a familiar blue, nor gold, nor dark. It was a pulsating energy field that slowly changed color, as if responding to the emotional state of the observer. Enki looked around and immediately understood. This was not a physical world. It was a realm of consciousness, a space between worlds, accessible only through extremely ancient technology or power. And in the center of that place, the hybrid remained standing, completely stable, as if that environment had been made for him. He walked a few steps, and where his feet touched, the surface lit up with patterns similar to those on the star map seen in the previous chamber. Enki realized that those marks were not just decorations, they were codes, instructions, command portals, pure information being translated into light. The hybrid raised his arm, and once again three-dimensional symbols appeared around him, slowly rotating like sentient constellations. Ninhursag approached, fascinated. He's activating the domain, but how does he know what to do? Enki did not respond immediately. His mind searched for connections, tried to reorganize everything he knew about the legends of the architects of the beginning, and a terrible, and at the same time inevitable, conclusion began to take shape. Because he was not born to be controlled. He was born to awaken what was dormant. Before Ninhursag could ask what that meant, the ground around them shifted, projecting gigantic images into the air. They were not memories, not records, not holograms. They were fragments of pure consciousness, as if the domain was directly sharing with them information that had never been intended for the Anunnaki. They saw civilizations that preceded all they knew. Beings made of light and matter at the same time, shaping worlds with thought, guiding entire species to higher levels of consciousness. They also saw what appeared to be a great rupture, a drop in the universal vibration, a collapse of something that previously maintained harmony between dimensions. And then they saw the Anunnaki, not as original creators, but as late heirs, occupying a space left by older forces. Ninhursag put his hand over his mouth. We weren't the first. Enki closed his eyes, absorbing the revelation. No, we only inherited its fragments, its tools, its remains. The image then changed, now focusing on the hybrid's figure. Energy lines emerged from the symbol on his chest, connecting to the patterns of the domain. Suddenly, everything fell into place. The hybrid was not just a genetic experiment. He was a key, a bridge, one living device created to access mental and energetic structures that the Anunnaki were never able to completely decode. He was, in essence, the missing link between divine knowledge and human potential. At that moment, a new presence began to form behind them, soft but deeply powerful, as if made from the vibration of 1,000 united voices. They slowly turned around, and what they saw had no definite shape, but emanated such vast consciousness that they both instinctively backed away. The entity spoke, but not in words, in pure meaning. You have brought the key to the realm of the beginning, one that carries forgotten memory and reborn possibility. Ninhursag fell to his knees at the presence. Enki remained standing, although he felt his legs wobble. Who, or what, are you? The answer reverberated like a wave that crossed all the senses. We are that which came before, that which wrote the first line of creation, and that which fell when the harmony was broken. The domain lit up brightly. Fragments of history that had never been recorded on tablets because they were too old to have been written down, passed before them in the form of living energy. They saw the great rupture, the moment when the civilization of the architects fragmented into multiple dimensions, spreading its essence across primordial worlds, where it was sometimes found by later beings, such as the Anunnaki, who confused inheritance with authorship. The entity continued, "The hybrid is not yours. It belongs to the greater flow of creation. It is the point of convergence. It is the returning memory." The hybrid stepped forward, the light in his chest synchronizing with the light of the domain. For the first time, he spoke clearly, not just imitating, but forming meaning. Why do I exist? And the answer came like silent thunder. You exist to restore what was lost. Enki and Ninhursag looked at each other. Restore? What? The entity seemed to read his thoughts.
The war you fear is not between gods and men. It is between what was and what will become, and you, descendants of the stars, created the catalyst without understanding the magnitude. Suddenly, energetic fissures began to appear on the periphery of the domain, as if something or someone was trying to invade that dimension. A name echoed in Enki's consciousness like a warning. Anu. The entity then spoke again, now urgently. Time is closing. Choose your next step carefully.
The light in the hybrid's chest exploded in a pattern that illuminated the entire domain, opening a new energetic passageway. The ground shook. Ninhursag shouted. Enki tried to hold the hybrid back, but it was too late. The next stage had begun. If you've made it this far and are feeling this revelation taking shape, comment, "The ancient truth is near," to further strengthen the journey of this story. The explosion of light that erupted from the hybrid's chest was not just an energetic manifestation. It was as if an entire layer of reality had been torn away, exposing a structure behind the physical world, something that should never have been visible to the eyes of any being, not even the Sumerian gods. The domain reacted immediately, as if it were a living organism trying to adapt to the presence of such a powerful catalyst. The surrounding fissures expanded, revealing fragments of worlds, echoes of timelines, and shadows of civilizations that existed before any known record. Enki tried to protect Ninhursag, pulling her back when the dimensional vibration became too strong, but the hybrid remained at the center of the energetic storm, motionless, as if it were finally occupying the place for which it had been created, or awakened. The entity that presented itself as heir to the architects of the beginning surrounded the hybrid with a halo of golden energy, as if it were evaluating, measuring, and activating hidden layers within it. Enki watched with fascination and terror. "What are you doing with him?" he asked, trying to keep control of his voice. The answer came once again in pure meaning, a form of communication that cut across words. Unlocking, restoring, allowing the link to fulfill its original function. Ninhursag took a step back, his hand over his heart. Function? Is he supposed to bring balance or destruction? The entity slowly rotated, its amorphous form rippling as if it were composed of condensed memories. Balance and destruction are faces of the same truth. All creation requires rupture. All evolution requires dissolution. At that moment, the dimensional fissure began to pulse with a familiar pattern, an energetic signature that Enki recognized before the manifestation even occurred. The presence was heavy, relentless, carrying the strength of an absolute ruler. As the crack opened completely, revealing a tier of pure celestial energy, a materialized projection formed with brutality, Anu had found dominance. His look wasn't one of surprise, it was one of judgment. "So here is the mistake you hid from me, Enki." His voice echoed like trapped thunder. "The hybrid that threatens not only our bloodline, but the entire order established by the heavens." Enki stepped forward, instinctively protecting the hybrid. "He is not a mistake. He is the key to understanding what you have forgotten." Anu raised his hand, and the domain shook. The ancient entity reacted, expanding its form until it filled half the space around it, as if it wanted to block the advance of the Sumerian ruler. "You have no authority here, late heir." Anu's voice changed, showing irritation. "This creation violates divine boundaries. What has been mixed must be undone." The hybrid, who until then had remained silent, took a step forward, and when he looked at Anu, something impossible happened. His pupils split into multiple rings, reflecting the cosmic pattern of the domain. He spoke, but his voice seemed carried by many others, as if a choir of ancient consciousnesses spoke through him. "I am not the work of chance. I am the return of memory." The sentence reverberated throughout the domain, distorting the surrounding light. Anu took a half step back, not out of fear, but out of recognition. He knew that energy pattern. He had seen it before, in the most secret records that the Anunnaki themselves avoided accessing. "You bear their signature," muttered Anu, almost to himself. "The first ones. The ones that disappeared." The ancient entity moved closer, its presence enveloping the hybrid like a shield. "He is part of us, and part of you, and it is precisely this fusion that makes him complete." The tension reached an explosive limit. The domain began to crack at multiple points, as if it were not capable of supporting two such ancient forces directly confronting each other. Enki realized that if something wasn't done, that entire reality could collapse. He ran up to the hybrid, holding his hands. "You must choose now. Follow the lineage of heaven, or the lineage of the beginning." But the hybrid shook his head. "I don't belong to just one lineage. I belong to continuity." He then raised both hands, and something even deeper activated within him. A third pattern, distinct from both the Anunnaki and the architects. A pure hybrid pattern, an energy that none of them had ever seen before. The shock released by this energy expanded like a wave that passed through every layer of the domain. Anu tried to resist, raising his power to counter the impact, but he was violently dragged back, his manifestation distorted by the new frequency emanating from the hybrid. Ninhursag fell to his knees, unable to bear the vibration. Enki held her, protecting her with his own energy field. The ancient entity seemed almost proud. "He is not the key, he is the door." When the light finally dissipated, the domain had completely changed. It was no longer a space between worlds. It was a corridor that connected multiple realities, all converging around the hybrid. And Enki realized something that left him breathless. For the first time in all of history, a being was capable of redefining the rules of existence. And this being had been born from the union between forbidden knowledge and human biology. Anu, still trying to compose herself, stared at the hybrid with a mixture of fear and recognition. "If you continue, nothing we know will remain the same." The hybrid simply responded, "That's the purpose." And before anyone could react, he stepped forward, and reality shattered in a luminous spiral. If you're feeling like the revelation is coming to a head, comment, "I follow to the end of the truth, to to show that you're still on this journey with me. The luminous spiral that swallowed the hybrid did not behave like an ordinary portal. It was not just a passage, but a living reorganization of space-time itself, as if reality was trying to catch up with the unprecedented frequency he had awakened. Enki instinctively ran towards the point where the hybrid had disappeared, but the ancient entity erected a soft barrier, preventing him from advancing. "If you enter now, you will be undone," she said, her voice tinged with something close to regret. Enki stared at the spiral, feeling a tightness in his chest. Not from fear, but from a deep understanding that he had momentarily lost control over that which he had dedicated eons to protecting. The entire domain shook like a metamorphosing organism, and each vibration seemed to whisper that a new form of consciousness was about to emerge. The space quickly began to reorganize itself, as if the spiral was redrawing everything around it. Fragments of memory, not just of Enki, but of the Anunnaki lineage itself, were ripped out and displayed around them, projecting floating images that blended with the light. It was possible to see scenes of the Anunnaki's arrival on Earth, their discussions about human creation, their internal conflicts, and even secrets that were never recorded on tablets or transmitted orally. It seemed as if the spiral was revealing what had always been hidden behind the distorted versions of history. Anu, still unsteady and visibly shaken, tried to dispel one of the projections, but his hand passed through the image without effect. "He is breaking the veil between memory and matter," said the ancient entity, his form rippling more intensely. "None of you have ever achieved this." Enki noted one fragment in particular, an ancient souvenir from his first genetic experiment with human prototypes. He saw his own face, young, determined, and also hesitant. He saw Ninhursag at his side, correcting genetic structures, adding codes that would later give rise to human consciousness. But there was something in the memory that Enki had never noticed, a shadow behind them, a presence that seemed to watch silently, as if it already knew where that evolutionary line would end. "Who is this?" he asked, approaching the projection. The ancient entity responded, "The one who preceded your choices, the one who recognized the potential you were about to create, the one who left the seed of awakening." The domain continued to expand. Now, beyond the memories, structures appeared that looked like giant Sumerian tablets, but alive, pulsing with changing symbols. Each symbol contorted as if trying to translate abstract ideas into understandable languages. Ninhursag walked up to one of them, touching one of the glyphs that rearranged itself around his fingers. The tablet glowed brightly, revealing a message that seemed to come directly from the core of creation. Every form seeks its origin. Every origin seeks its continuation. She backed away, stunned. "This isn't just a record, it's a consciousness." The spiral then silently exploded, releasing a wave of light that spread throughout the entire domain. And when the light dissipated, the hybrid appeared again, but transformed. His eyes weren't just dimensional rings. Now, they contained patterns that Enki had never seen, structures that suggested multiple layers of perception. His very presence altered the space, and every step he took left trails that floated before dissolving. The hybrid raised his hand, and the living tablets responded immediately, as if recognizing in him the ultimate authority. Anu, for the first time in ages, looked genuinely vulnerable. "What have you become?" he asked, almost voiceless. The hybrid replied calmly, "Not what I became, what you always avoided becoming." Enki approached, his heart tight, trying to understand that being that carried both him and something much older. "Do you remember us? Do you remember who we are to you?" The hybrid touched Enki's shoulder, and for an instant, an energetic field surrounding father and son seemed to suspend time. "I remember, and that's why I need to go further." The ancient entity then manifested beside them, its form now much more defined, almost solid. He needs to traverse the core of creation. There, he will decide whether his existence will be the beginning of a new lineage or the end of the current one. Ninhursag put his hand over his mouth as if trying to stop his emotion from overflowing. "The end? Are you saying he can undo everything we did?" The entity responded, "Only if he believes that your path no longer has a purpose. He will not destroy out of anger. He will destroy out of necessity." Anu tried to intervene one last time. "I will not allow an unstable existence to decide the fate of entire civilizations." But before he could move forward, the hybrid simply looked up, and Anu was frozen in place, enveloped by a light so deep It seemed to pierce through his very essence. You no longer command what belongs to the beginning. The hybrid then walked toward the newly opening portal, not a spiral, but a triangle of pure light, trembling as if it were made of liquid truth. He looked at Enki and said, "If I return, nothing will be the same. If I don't return, you will need to find out who you really are." And upon crossing the border of that primordial portal, the domain shook as if an entire era was saying goodbye. If you are still following this profound journey, comment, "I follow the trail as far as it leads," to show that you are in on this revelation until the last chapter. When the hybrid passed through the triangle of light and disappeared into the primordial core, there was no explosion, no sound, nor any visible sign of destruction. What happened was a silence that seemed to extend in all directions, as if reality itself was awaiting the next command of that being who carried fragments of Enki, the Anunnaki lineage, and something infinitely greater. Old. Enki remained motionless for long moments, staring at the void that the portal had left behind. The domain, once vibrant and malleable, was now suspended in a state of restrained breathing, like an organism that hesitates between being born again or erasing its own existence. Ninhursag approached Enki with slow, cautious steps, as if afraid that any sudden movement could alter the fragile balance of that moment. "He made the decision without hesitation," she murmured, still trying to understand the scope of what they had witnessed. He knew exactly where he was going. Enki ran a hand over his face, feeling a weight that wasn't physical. Because he didn't choose it himself, he heard something inside, something none of us have ever been able to hear. There was a tone of pride and fear mixed in his voice, a recognition that the hybrid could have become everything he'd ever hoped for, and everything he'd ever feared. The ancient entity reappeared, but its form was wavering, as if it were being pulled by opposing forces. Every line of her silhouette crumbled and reformed into unknown patterns, suggesting that even she was being affected by the hybrid's departure from beyond the realm. "The core is rewriting the layers of creation," he said with difficulty. "It's being tested, and testing everything in existence at the same time." Enki turned quickly. "Is he at risk?" The entity took a pause that seemed to last eons. "I don't risk consequence. A consequence that surpasses any definition of life and death, you know." Anu, still limited by the energy the hybrid had left over him, was now able to move his head slowly, like someone waking up from a forced trance. There was anger in his gaze, but also a trace of recognition. He knew he had lost control, perhaps for the first time since assuming his reign. "You have opened doors that should not exist," he whispered to Enki, "and now we cannot predict what will come." Enki remained firm. The doors were always there. We just pretended we didn't see them. The light surrounding Anu finally dissipated, allowing him to breathe more freely, but his power will never seem as weakened as it did in that moment. The living tablets that floated across the domain began to vibrate, as if a new message was trying to form. Sumerian symbols rearranged themselves, spinning in circles, intersecting with impossible geometric patterns. A phrase began to repeat itself in multiple layers of light. "Origin is choice. Choice is return. Return is revelation." Ninhursag placed his hand over his chest as he realized that the message was not just coming from the tablets, but from the very fabric of the domain. "That's him," he said, eyes wide. "He is communicating from within." The ancient entity leaned in, as if listening to something beyond the reach of others. "It's not just communication," he explained. "He is shaping, creating a bridge between what is and what can be. And in doing so, he questions whether the current creation deserves to remain as it is, or whether it needs to be corrected." Anu stepped forward. "Corrected?" His voice shook. "Are you saying he can judge our entire bloodline?" The entity turned towards him firmly. "Don't judge. Understand. An understanding can remake entire paths." The floor of the domain began to crack, not as rupture, but as if veiled layers were finally opening. Rifts revealed fragments of other timelines, alternative versions of creation, possibilities that never fully manifested. Enki looked at one of them and saw something that made him uneasy. A world where humans never awakened to full consciousness, where they remained mute servants, unable to question, unable to imagine. He felt a chill down his spine. If he considers that that path was more stable, what stops him from erasing us to rebuild that? The ancient entity approached Enki, and its voice now had an almost human tone, as if it had absorbed the hybrid's emotions. "He doesn't want to erase, he wants to line up. But before he could explain further, a silent explosion expanded from the portal. It wasn't light, it wasn't sound. It was something like a wave of pure consciousness which passed through each of them, as if reading their deepest truths. Enki felt his own essence being examined, reorganized, reevaluated. Ninhursag tried to maintain her posture, but tears flowed without her noticing. Anu staggered, crouching, clutching her head. And then the wave passed, leaving the domain in a state of suspension. The portal began to slowly close, its light contracting like a heart returning to its normal rhythm. But before he disappeared completely, a silhouette formed inside him. Just for a second, just long enough for everyone to see. It was the hybrid, not in physical form, but as you in outline of energy, an echo of your presence. And his message was unspoken. It was felt. I will come back when you choose who you really want to be. The portal closed. The domain went dark. And none of them knew whether this marked the beginning of a new era or the prelude to an inevitable end. If you stayed until the end of this video, it shows that you truly seek to understand the truth behind humanity's oldest mysteries. So before you leave, do this. Subscribe to the channel, because we still have a lot of forbidden revelations to explore, and you won't want to miss any of them. Also, leave your like. It is essential for more people to discover this content. And to prove that you've come this far, comment, "I choose knowledge." This phrase helps me know who really follows every detail of this journey. And now, don't stop here. The next video is already appearing on the screen, and it continues exactly this line of ancient mysteries. Click and come with me. Knowledge does not end. It just changes form.